Sparta. Perhaps today it's hard to find a person who hasn't heard of it. The legendary ancient state, homeland of brutal, harsh warriors and even harsher customs. The other Greeks admired the strength of the Spartan army and were impressed by the government system of Sparta. For example, Plato took it as a model for his ideal state. But at the same time, other Greeks were in no hurry to adopt Spartan customs, because even for that harsh era, they seemed excessively inhumane and cruel. It is no exaggeration to say that Sparta was not only the strongest, but also the strangest state in ancient Greece. In its politics, a tendency towards self-isolation coexisted with a desire to dominate the surrounding peoples. And military power was combined with cultural and economic backwardness. Over the centuries, many myths and stereotypes have arisen around Sparta and its legendary warriors. In this video, I will tell you how the toughest warriors of antiquity really lived, what the secret of their invincibility was, and why Sparta eventually fell into decline. You will also learn why Spartan children were made to suffer, where the expression laconic comes from, and why Spartan women were rented out. My name is Semyon and I'm kicking off the How They Lived series. Let's get started. Government structure. Sparta had a typical military dictatorship, which has happened more than once in world history. However, many of its features can be called unique. All residents of the city-state were divided into several classes. At the head of the state were the warriors, full citizens, who called themselves Spartiates or homoioi. There were relatively few of them, but they were the true aristocracy of ancient Sparta. Below them, below the aristocrats, was a class that could loosely be called the common people. It included many categories: impoverished warriors, former slaves who had gained their freedom, foreigners living in Sparta, free craftsmen, and non-citizens. And at the very bottom of the social pyramid were the slaves and helots, who had no rights at all. However, unlike slaves in other Greek city-states, the helots did not belong to any particular master, but to the entire Spartan society. The situation of the helots in Sparta was extremely harsh. They were not considered people at all. Any warrior could easily kill a helot without any reason or consequences. Moreover, once a year, so-called cryptaia were held, which were essentially manhunts. Young Spartiate men would sneak into the helot settlements to kill one of them. This way, young Spartan warriors were taught not to fear killing and blood. To set them apart from the other inhabitants of Sparta, the helots had to wear special clothing and hats made of dog fur. It's clear that the helots fiercely hated their masters, and whenever they had the chance, they would start rebellions and uprisings. According to the ancient Greek historian Xenophon, they were ready to devour the Spartans alive. One of the largest uprisings happened after a massive earthquake in Sparta. It took several decades to suppress it. It can be said that it was the helots who posed the main threat to Sparta. The highest governing body of Sparta was the Council of Elders. It was the one that made the most important decisions for the state. There was also a people's assembly among the Spartans, in which all male Spartiates over the age of 30 could participate. However, it didn't actually have any real power. It was more of a tribute to tradition. The people's assembly was considered valid only if one of the elders was present at it. And if they didn't want to convene the assembly, they simply didn't show up to the meeting. Sparta also had its own kings, 2 of them. They ruled together. By tradition, the Spartan kings belonged to the Agiad and Eurypontid dynasties. However, they didn't have real power. They were more like military leaders who led the army on campaigns. They also performed the functions of priests. Lycurgus reforms. Interestingly, Sparta originally developed like the other Greek city-states. Until the 6th century, Spartans enjoyed using expensive and beautiful things, and the products of local craftsmen were of excellent quality. Everything changed with the reforms of Lycurgus, the legendary leader who created a strict set of rules for the Spartans. In fact, it was he who turned Sparta into a huge military camp. Thanks to these innovations, the Spartans were able to defeat their neighbors and significantly expand their territories. Over time, Sparta became the main military power in the region, striking fear into its neighbors. However, at the same time, the level of material culture sharply declined. And Sparta itself acquired those distinctive features that made it so different from other Greek cities. Spartan life was characterized by extreme austerity. After all, it's no coincidence that even today we call modest conditions Spartan. Spartans were limited in almost everything. It was believed that wealth and luxury would corrupt warriors. In Sparta, science, literature, and all forms of art except music were strictly forbidden. But even music was limited exclusively to military marches, and to prevent Spartans from being corrupted by foreign customs, they were forbidden to travel. They could only see other lands during military campaigns in foreign territories. Guests were also not welcome in Sparta, because outsiders could teach the locals bad things. Instead of small and light coins like all normal people had, Sparta used heavy, rusty pieces of iron as money. This money was not accepted in other Greek lands. You couldn't buy foreign goods or luxury items with it. For the same reason, foreign ships did not enter Spartan ports. However, after the introduction of iron money, there were fewer crimes. Even for a small amount in such currency, you had to set aside a separate storage room. Try stealing something like that. For the same reason, there was practically no corruption in ancient Sparta. With money that heavy, you needed a cart just to give a bribe. Spartans were forbidden to put their names on tombstones. Only the bravest warriors and rulers could count on such a privilege. Male Spartan citizens were engaged exclusively in military affairs. Any other type of activity, whether it was farming, craftsmanship, or even trade, was considered extremely humiliating for them. There were so-called warrior groups in the Spartan army. Groups of warriors who lived, ate, and fought together. The Spartans believed that this was how a collective spirit was forged. Every young warrior had to join a syssitia. Otherwise, he would be demoted in status. He would become a hypomeion. Literally translated, it means fallen. But to join the group, the newcomer needed a unanimous decision from all the warriors of the syssitia. And although much of what I've told you may seem wild to a modern person, Spartan customs contributed to the cohesion of the citizen body. They nipped in the bud any possibility of wealth-based divisions in society which could have undermined its unity. The legendary black broth. In historical films, Spartan warriors are usually portrayed as brutal bodybuilders, which was unlikely to be true in reality. Anyone who has been to a gym knows that training alone is not enough to build impressive muscles. You also need good nutrition. But that's exactly what Spartan warriors lacked. Luxury in food was not encouraged. Each warrior was allocated 3.5 buckets of barley per month, 2.5 kilograms of cheese, a little over 1 kilogram of dates, and just a small amount of cash for buying meat and fish. The Spartans believed that undernourishment helped strengthen discipline and boosted the fighting spirit of the soldiers. The most popular dish in Sparta was black broth. The exact recipe has not survived, but all contemporaries without exception described it as exceptionally disgusting. Most likely the ingredients of this dish included blood, cheese, legs, lentils, vinegar, and salt. There is a story that once a foreign king demanded that a captured Spartan prepare black soup for him. When the monarch tasted the dish, he said, "Now I understand why Spartans are not afraid to die in battle. It's better to give your life than to eat something like this." Alcohol was completely banned in Sparta. To show children its harmful effects, the masters would deliberately get their slaves drunk with wine. The upbringing of Spartans. An important role in shaping the famous Spartan mentality was played by a unique upbringing system, which has no equivalent in history. Future warriors were sent to military camps at the age of 7, where they were intensively trained to develop masculine qualities. The Spartans believed that the stricter a child's upbringing, the better. Children were not given clothes or shoes. They had to sleep on bare ground, laying down reeds or straw that they gathered themselves. The trainees were fed sparingly, so theft flourished in the camps. On the one hand, it was encouraged, but if a boy was caught, he would face severe punishment. It was believed that this way, cunning and resourcefulness were developed in a future warrior. Hazing and bullying of younger boys by older ones were common in such camps. Once a year, the boys were subjected to brutal whipping at the altar of Artemis. In such a brutal way, strength of character was instilled in future warriors. During the punishment, the child was not allowed to make a sound. The Spartans were taught writing and reading, but only the bare minimum was provided. Greater focus was given to children's physical development. The training program included running, wrestling, gymnastics, swimming, javelin and discus throwing, and weapons training. Usually, the training of a future warrior was completed by the age of 20, although until the age of 30 he remained in the barracks, where, under the supervision of instructors, he continued his military training. Only upon reaching the age of 30 was a Spartan considered a full citizen. Did they kill infants in Sparta? Weak or sick infants were killed by the Spartans. This is perhaps the most well-known and widespread myth about ancient Sparta. It first appears in the works of Plutarch, the famous ancient Greek historian and philosopher. According to him, if a child had any physical defects, he was simply thrown into a deep ravine called Apothetai, which translates as the place of rejection. Most modern historians consider Plutarch's story to be a fabrication. No remains have been found at the supposed site of the crime, and after all, we're not talking about an isolated case, but about a widespread and long-term practice. Archaeologists should, in theory, have found piles of children's bones at the gorge's bottom. Moreover, there are no other sources that confirm the Spartans had a custom of killing their own infants. It only remains to add that the ancient Greeks really did have customs of killing sick children. It is possible, or more likely, that sick children in Sparta were not killed, but simply expelled from the ranks of the Spartans and raised among other social classes. It can also be added that Plutarch lived several centuries after the events he described, so he could very well have got some things wrong or embellished it. Spartan brevity. The names Sparta and Spartans were introduced by the Romans after they had conquered Greece. The inhabitants of Sparta themselves called themselves Lacedaemonians, that is, citizens of the polis of Lacedaemon. Spartan boys were taught not only to handle weapons, but also to express their thoughts briefly and powerfully. In other words, to speak briefly and strictly to the point. Later, this manner of speaking came to be called laconism, after the self-name of the Spartan state. One of the most famous examples of Spartan laconism is associated with the Macedonian king Philip II. Before his campaign against Sparta, he sent the following message there. I advise you to surrender immediately, because if my army enters your lands, I will destroy your gardens, enslave your people, and destroy your city. To which the Spartans replied with just one word, if. In fact, this manner of communication was not some kind of posturing or cheap arrogance on the part of the Spartans. It reflected their nature and internal system of values. They were warriors, practical people, and they valued resourcefulness and the habit of keeping their composure much more than education. The most important intellectual virtue for a Spartan was to quickly grasp the essence of the matter and, without any hesitation or wasting time, act as needed. Apparently, these people were not inclined to reflection. Women of Sparta. The women of Sparta were considered the freest in ancient Greece. All sources, without exception, report this. Overall, this is not an exaggeration, but as they say, there were some nuances. Let's start with upbringing. Essentially, it was carried out in the same spirit as the upbringing of young men. It was all quite harsh. A lot of attention was paid to physical exercises and games because the Spartans believed that only a healthy and strong woman could give birth to a true warrior. Plutarch wrote that the education program for girls in Sparta included running, wrestling, gymnastics, javelin throwing, and discus throwing. Contemporaries admired the beauty and health of Spartan women. In addition, girls were taught reading and writing, as well as dancing and choral singing. Special attention was given to the latter skill. Girls' choirs were extremely popular in Sparta, where girls were grouped by age. Each of these vocal groups was led by a professional poet. Competitions between choirs were held regularly. Another interesting Spartan custom was also associated with choral singing. Girls would publicly humiliate young men who did not meet the high standards. Special festivals were organized where Spartan girls performed mocking songs about young men who were weaker and less agile than their peers. It was believed that such trolling was an excellent way to motivate young men on their difficult path to military glory. Young men and women in Sparta communicated freely, but casual relationships were not allowed. Despite the relative freedom of Spartan women, they had no special rights when it came to choosing a groom. Everything was decided by the father or guardian. The wedding was usually accompanied by a ritual abduction of the bride. After that, the woman came completely under the authority of her husband. Marriages in Sparta also had their own peculiarities. I already mentioned that a man became a full citizen only after the age of 30. He could get married earlier, it was not forbidden by law, but he still continued to live in the barracks. He came home very rarely. Obviously, this did not contribute to a happy life for young couples. Yes, Spartan women really did enjoy much greater freedom compared to women from other Greek cities, but most likely this was a matter of necessity. After all, who was supposed to run the household and look after the home while the man was away on endless campaigns or honing his warrior skills in the barracks? But that's not all. Some of the Spartans' family customs literally shocked the other Hellenes. For example, an elderly Spartan could bring another man to his young wife so that she could conceive a child by him. If a man wanted children but did not want to start a family, he could father children with another Spartan's wife. One woman could be the wife of several brothers at once, but in this case the children were raised jointly. A man could give his wife to another man so that she could bear him children. The woman's own opinion in this case didn't really matter to anyone. The main thing was to have as many healthy and strong children as possible, future warriors. A few words in conclusion or why Sparta declined. For a long time, the Spartan army was invincible. The Greeks and later the Romans admired the strength and courage of its warriors. But gradually, Sparta's glory began to fade. Despite the valor of its warriors, the Spartan army remained technologically underdeveloped. It was slow to adopt innovations in warfare and did not pay enough attention to engineering. Here, the Spartans' constant drive for self-isolation and their disdainful attitude toward other peoples played a cruel joke on them. As a result, Sparta fell under the onslaught of the Roman legionaries and became part of the empire. It should be said that in recognition of the Spartans' past achievements, the Romans granted the Spartans a certain degree of independence. Thus, the glory of the invincible warriors served Sparta one last time. That's all. Goodbye.